thing about Lean and Lean Six Sigma, and particularly Lean Six Sigma, is the problem-solving methodologies and the approach. And a lot of us really we think we understand a lot about problem solving. But when it comes to actually doing problem solving and understanding how to solve problems, we tend to fluctuate in our approach. We don't necessarily have a kind of a toolkit or a standard way of approaching problems that makes sure that we are rigorous in the way that we solve problems. And if you're working within business, you know the fact that businesses want you to solve problems faster and faster and faster. And often we spend a lot of time jumping to solutions and not necessarily going through that pre-work we're kind of going to show you now as well. So we're going to talk particularly around DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And this is a problem-solving methodology that we can use to solve multiple problems that we're going to face within business, if not most of our problems that we will ever face. It's a really, really solid foundation, and it brings together some of the ideas, the key ideas that you need to be thinking about in each of these phases, but also it's going to talk to you about some of the tools and the approaches you could be using to look at each of these key phases as well. So I'm just going to share my screen with you guys, and you can see here we are. So when we talk about DMAIC, we are talking about these kind of 5 phases: the define, the measure, the analyze, the improve, and the control. So when we talk about define, the first thing we've got to think about is what is it we're actually trying to solve? Now, this might sound really, really basic, and obviously we know, but a lot of the time we don't go into this in an amount of detail, and therefore we end up solving something that we think we understand, but maybe we don't. So at this stage, what are we trying to solve? We've got to be really specific around that. Then we go into this measure stage. So the measure stage is all about what does the current process, what does the current operation tell us is actually happening. It's not about what you think's happening. It's not about what your boss thinks happening. It's not about what your team, your managers. It's what is, using data and facts, is the process actually telling us. The analyze then is all around how do we identify what are those root causes which are driving the issues that we've identified within that. So what are the root causes that tie back to the problem that we are facing? During the improve, what we're really doing is driving actions to compensate for those root causes that we found. A lot of the time, these two don't match when you look at some people's projects. You have an analyze that identifies this and this root cause, and then the improvement actions don't link back to those. But here, what we're saying is that when you analyze and you identify 2 or 3 root causes, your improvement activities should always be related back to those root causes as well. And then finally, the control section, the part where everybody misses. We're so excited to be done, we run away before we do it. And the business often pushes us off to other priorities. But the control is to make sure that we find a way to make that new solution sustainable long term. We've got to make sure that those improvements stay. Otherwise, they will simply revert to a previous behavior. And in 6 months, 3 months, even 12 months, we'll be back doing the same project. Or maybe somebody else will be doing it this time. But to avoid that, we've got to be really strong in the control phase as well. So let's go through these in a little bit more detail. We kind of run through them. So when we talk about define, we are talking about defining the business case. You know, what's wrong? What do we want to achieve? This is really important because that business case is the reason behind why the business is going to move forward with this. If that business case doesn't talk to the business, doesn't talk to your managers, doesn't talk to the senior people and what they're trying to achieve, you won't get the support. So we need to make sure we really define carefully what the business case is. We want to also make sure that we understand what that understand the customer and how that process is impacting the customer. So there's some tools under there. You can see things like the voice of the customer, the Canner analysis, the house of quality, critical to quality trees. All these tools are things that we would use from a Lean Six Sigma project that link back to trying to understand that customer. We've then got to define the process. So what is that process that's impacting that customer? Once again, if we're too broad here, we could end up trying to solve hundreds of processes, and we want to be really precise about that. So we might be looking at the side pot, one of the tools you learn in the yellow belt course, the green belt and the black, obviously. Process mapping, super powerful, and VSM, that value stream mapping as well. And then we've got manage the project. Who, where, when, how. How are we going to do this? What's the project plan, the structure? Who are the stakeholders? How are they going to impact with us? Do we really understand what's important to those stakeholders and kind of done an analysis of them? What is the team? How are we going to manage the team? Who's going to do what roles? And how are we going to make sure that we design this as much as possible to succeed and to have some great success? And then finally, you're going to be looking at that project approval. So we need to get buy-in for that project from our senior managers. So we need to make sure that that all links together. Once again, without that buy-in at the end there, without defining what the problem is and getting everybody behind to agree that this is the problem and this is what we want to try to achieve, we won't gain that project approval. And if it doesn't tie into what the business is trying to achieve or what you're trying to achieve in your area, you won't get the support you need to make it happen. So that's really, really key. So this is define. If we move over to the measure, well, we've got to understand what is it we're going to measure and how are we going to measure it. So we've got to develop the process measures. So what is the way that we're going to approach this problem and what are we actually going to measure? If those measurement processes are out, your data is going to be rubbish, it's not going to be meaningful, and you're going to really struggle. And lots of projects we see this here where they struggle a lot. Once you know what you're going to collect, and also once you know what those measures are, you've got to go and collect it from existing or from new data that you're going to have to go and get. Hopefully, it's going to be quite easy. And there's different ways you can see their collection methods, sampling frequency, all these types of tools that you can learn about what data to collect and how to go about collecting. Once we've collected it, we've got to understand whether the data is any good. So has it been collected in the right way? Does it give us not necessarily the results we're looking for, but is it coming through in the right format that gives us the insights that we kind of need as well? And once again, MSA, this is a posh term for measurement system analysis. And it's just a way to say, when we measure something, is the variability within our process from the process being strange and behaving strangely, or is it potentially due to the way that we're actually measuring it? And we obviously don't want the latter. Then we've got to understand the process behavior. So what does that look like from a data perspective? And then how do we baseline this? How do we baseline this process and baseline this capability? This is really, really important here. This baselining, just like in the previous version, where we've got to make sure that we get this sign-off and this agreement, this baseline is a sign-off and agreement at the end of the measure stage that this is the agreed performance baseline. Without that, you've got nothing to improve against. So if you don't set that baseline, how do you know that you've made an improvement? So this is the reason, this is really critical, this last step as well. If you get that right, then you can obviously imagine in the future when you compare your baseline today with the future, you'll be able to tell very, very quickly whether there's been an improvement. And it would be an agreed improvement. You won't be finding an improvement and then having to go back and argue whether it really is an improvement. When we look at Analyse, we've kind of got two stages of Analyse. We've got what we call, the data door, which is at the one side, and we've got the process door, which is these first two steps. So when we talk about the process door, we can analyze the process and we can develop theories and ideas. And this is around the team, the knowledge, the expertise that really exists from analyzing the processes. So how does the process actually work? We've got the process mapping, value stream mapping. We've got the laws of lean, spaghetti diagrams, 7 waste, or Tim Woods if you use 8. All these things we can use to actually analyze the process to find out what's going wrong. When we develop theories and ideas, what is the brainstorming approaches you need to use? How are we going to use 5 whys, affinity diagrams, measle charts, FMEA, failure mode effect analysis, a really powerful tool to understand how we can analyze the risks in the process as well. And then that's, as I said, that's very much like process thinking. But on the right-hand side here, analyze the data and verify root causes. We're trying to move away to a little bit more data-based analyzation of the data as well. So here we might be looking at the graphical techniques about what does the data actually tell us, hypothesis testing, normal testing, distribution identification, all these things that you learn as part of the green or the black belt as well. And then if we can get all this information, how can we use correlation, design of experiments, and hypothesis testing to be 100% or as close to confident as possible that those root causes are really those root causes? So these are data techniques to make sure that the root causes we've identified are the right ones. And we think there's some validation statistically that proves this to us as well. When you move over to improve, now, when we get to improve, a lot of people jump very, very quickly into improve too early. And they start improving this and that, and they come up with lots and lots of different ideas. But where you really need to be is to face the analysis that you've done and those root causes. So when you're looking at your improve stage, you should be taking those root causes and brainstorming those root causes. What could you do in all the ways imaginable that you could think of to make an improvement? So what are all the possible solutions? At this stage, you've got to be brave. You don't want to get narrowed down into what you thought, maybe at the start of the project, which is a little bit criminal. You want to understand what is it that you could potentially do? What are all the solutions that could drive this improvement? Then you use how to select the best solution. What is most likely to have the biggest impact and the biggest success from there as well? So that's what we'd look at. And once you've identified what that solution is going to look like and what those improvements are going to be, well, you need to make sure you assess the risks of them. Are there any risks to the business? Are there any risks to our people? Money risks? So these things, just to make sure that you're comfortable with those as well. Most solutions have some form of risk with them. And then you need to pilot and implement. Ideally, pilot, test, prove it works, and then implement. And what we always try to do is once we get to this stage, we implement quickly as well. And during the implementation stage, choose a small implementation to get started. If you can prove that that implementation improves that baseline that you've identified and improves those root causes, then you're going to be very quickly in a position that you can roll this out onto a larger scale. So always think about maybe scaling back those implementation until you're really sure that you've done it in a real world environment as well. And then the business will be behind supporting a wider implementation as well. And lastly, that control. So how do we implement stuff to make sure that the process will be continually measured after the project's finished, so we know whether it's going according to plan or not? How do we standardize those solutions? So how do we make it become BAU, business as usual? And what do we need to do? And then really importantly, how do we quantify the improvement? Once again, really important to go back to that baseline within the measure. Have we actually seen an improvement and how can we validate it? And then finally, the closing out of the project. What is the project report out you need to do? What is the benefit analysis that you've got? And this is nearly always the case where we would be using finance or somebody within the finance teams to validate the types of improvements that you're seeing within those projects as well. And here, if you've done really, really well, your benefits that you're going to get are going to relate directly back to what your goal statement was. Your solutions that you put in place are going to address your root cause, and you'll be able to see how in that measure phase, that baseline, the baseline has physically changed. There's been some change related to the actions that you take. And this is the way we've got to pull this DMAIC together. We can use other problem-solving methodologies like A3s, but it all kind of follows roughly that same path, that plan, do, check, and act. The DMAIC is just a really, really strong, rigorous process that really helps you think through everything you're doing when you're trying to come up with a new solution or trying to find out what is the problem, and you need to find a solution to that problem as well. So we hope that helps you. It's a quick introduction. If there's any questions, just jump online and give us a note. Always happy to hear from you. And always, if you go onto the yellow belt today, you'll be able to start learning about these in a level of detail. And obviously the green belt and the black belt will obviously take you through the online courses, will take you through a lot more detail around all of these tools that you've seen and the skills to drive that problem solving and business improvement methodology forward as well. So we hope you enjoyed, and please get in touch if you have any questions.